hell?
Hold on, Bob. You go too fast.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Harbor. I'm your host, the Kino Cowboy, and with me is the other host, Scott Keith, as usual. And today we're talking about a TV movie. And for those young enough who don't know, TV movies back in the day were considered by some to be a lesser form of a film, of a feature film.
And usually they were.
And usually they were. And they kind of they didn't go extinct, but they definitely lessened as streaming came about, and now you have straight to streaming movies, which
Yeah, straight to cable movies. What is that now? Is there anything?
the
Hallmark
Hallmark
movies? Yeah, that's
Lifetime,
what I'm
yeah.
saying.
That's
I don't
those
I don't have
continue
cable. I don't know.
as long as they appeal to like the 50 to 70-year-old woman range, those
Yeah,
still come out because
right.
they still have cable. Um and now we have straight to streaming, which I'd say on average is much higher quality than um the TV movie budget, but unfortunately now that the streaming wars are happening and some of the streaming platforms have seriously just lost a lot of respect creatively, and now they just churn out a bunch of 5 to 6 out of 10 movies just so they have content on their platform, and it gets bogged down and no one knows what to watch, and therefore they spend even less time on Netflix than maybe before. So who knows? That's a big conversation, probably, you know.
Right. And speaking of the dangers of a technological arms race, Threads is about
Threads, it might
nuclear
be
war.
the most uh insane TV movie, especially for its time, ever made.
Maybe,
There
yeah.
was, I mean, anything like
Look,
it.
can I just say
Yeah.
Threads, directed by Mark Zuckerberg, is the joke there's apparently, Adrian, you told me this movie started making rounds again because of Threads, the Twitter successor, supposedly.
Yeah.
And then the joke was that people are like, oh, yeah, Threads, it's a good movie. And I had never heard of this movie. And when you suggested this movie, I looked it up and I did go, it's a TV movie? That's not Kino. We're not doing TV movies on the podcast now, are we? Kino means cinema, it means the theatra.
Yeah, most movies, well, I'm not gonna say it depends. There are some quality ones. Usually they were really long and they were split into several parts. Like there's the famous one, Jesus of Nazareth, and then which is like fucking 5 hours, and they split it into several parts. That's pretty well made if you're into Christian, storytelling
Yeah.
from
But
the
that's just over an hour per gospel. So that's,
I know. It's just like there's a good amount of ones from like the 70s and 80s. It starts to taper off after that. My grandfather, Paul Clark, he was in a TV movie called The Blue and the Gray from the early 80s. And that was split into two parts. It was fairly popular at the time. He had like a couple scenes maybe. But that's pretty cool. Uh this takes it up a notch because a lot of TV movies, they're more than other regular films, are usually directors for hire, journeyman. It's clear up front that TV movies aren't possibly
auteur medium.
fit for the big screen or not as cinematic. But then you go into Threads, which is one of the more unconventional films I've seen, especially narratively, and it is quite cinematic the way it's shot. So it's got this weird blend of like a narration, almost like a documentarian style, reenactment style with normal narrative, and it's like a weird blend. And to me, it's just an interesting watch. It's a very bleak watch, but my question to you is this exploitative?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think it's exploitative because I think from what I read about it, um, is it preying on people's Cold War fears? Yes. Because this movie, especially the first half hour, made me really anxious. And it reminded me, of all things, of Uncut Gems, of that kind of Safdie brothers' constant anxiety. You know something's about to go wrong
Yeah.
at any given time.
That's
But
interesting.
ratcheted up on a huge scale.
And it feels very claustrophobic because of its tight angles and close-ups and stuff. It
Right.
really pulls that off.
I think the low budget worked for this movie. They made the low budget work for them. Because there are things like those tight angles, where it does feel claustrophobic. I guess because they didn't have sets or they couldn't light a whole set. But maybe they could light one person. And so there's a lot of tight angle stuff like that. I don't know what kind of equipment they were hauling around. Also, the use of almost montage style cutting to convey action, because there's certain action they don't have the budget to film, a giant Roland Emmerich style nuclear destruction set piece, which that would be exploitative.
It wouldn't fit the style anyway.
It wouldn't fit the tone exactly. And so they made it work for them. I really enjoyed this movie. Actually, I'm very glad I watched this movie. I think so. This was it was a joint production between BBC and somebody else. I don't remember. Maybe Australian. It was like an
Some Australian company, yeah.
Yeah. Some Australian company I've never heard of. But I get the feeling that this was made with legitimate anti-war intentions, not just to make a profit. Honestly, if the BBC's funding it, you could argue, I guess they're supposed to be impartial or whatever, but you could argue that the British government has a vested interest in nuclear war not occurring.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I think
well, for a while, this only aired a couple times, and then it finally aired again in the 2000s, and then it finally had a scan and restoration in 2018. So it's really the past 5 years that it's kind of had a reinvigoration, I guess. But it's very narratively, it's just very loose, just showing a couple of different groups of people kind of just following them along while they try to ignore all the background obvious signs of what's about to happen. And that builds tension in such an interesting way, and it's so realistic. It gives you kind of chills in a way.
It does, and it feels very realistic as to how people would react.
Yeah.
Because one thing, so you and I, in our lives, until as people born in the 90s, until very recently, had not really faced any sort of threat of nuclear annihilation. Putin, there was about a week, maybe not even, where Putin was kind of scaring me when he first invaded Ukraine, because there's all these rumors like, what if he has cancer and he just doesn't give a crap and just decides to nuke everybody with him, which is still possible. Even though they're supposed to, would officials go with that if the order was given? Who knows? But that's a whole nother thing. So it is interesting. I think that plus the threat of climate change plus the pandemic all bring it into contemporary relevance.
Sure.
More than it would have been in 2018 when it first came out, for instance, because the pandemic definitely showed me how unreliable groups are in things like when you have anti-war protesters being, and then you have, like, I forget what she says. She says something, they'll go after our industry, and some guy in the crowd shouts out, Sheffield has no industry. And he's starting to make other arguments and make it about economics and all this stuff that kind of distracts from the point. Or people denying what's really happening. That did remind me of the pandemic a little bit, not too much. More in hindsight. In the moment, I was just interested in seeing what happened. Because I've always been kind of interested in nukes and nuclear war ever since I discovered them, since I was 7. I was like, whoa, a bomb that can take out a city, that's cool but scary.
is very scary, and it's
And
more of
imagine
a,
seeing this at the height of the Cold War in 1984.
yeah.
The
This
Soviet Union was on the rocks, but not everybody.
I've watched some fucked up movies, but watching this on cable in the 80s as like with your family or something, that's the mind-blowing part when you watch this. You're like, how the fuck did this air? Because to
There was a,
me,
go
it
ahead.
just feels like a lot of the scenes you feel like you're a fly on the wall just spectating humans, and almost like this is a you're watching a live simulation of what's going to happen. And if the footage makes it feel like it's from like an actual event, like a documentary from an alternate timeline where it did happen or something. I think it's impressive filmmaking in that way.
I think it is too. I
Yeah.
think the amount that they were able to accomplish on what was, I think it was this movie had a budget of like a couple $1 million by today's standards,
Yeah.
maybe. It was like 400,000 pounds at the time, which I
Yeah.
think is 1.2 million pounds, which is pounds are worth more in dollars depending on the exchange rate. Let's say around 2 million.
Yeah.
Um, so it's incredibly impressive. I think a lot of the actors and extras were volunteers. Some of them were legitimate anti-war protesters.
Yeah.
So that's why they were okay to be in this movie. So one thing I just want to point out, in 1966, the BBC made a pseudo documentary called The War Game that they decided to not air on television. They would only air it in selected screenings, basically because they thought they would have another Orson Welles War of the World scenario where people
Yeah.
think it's real, and people think there's actually a nuclear bomb going off. So they're like, let's not air this
Yeah.
because people aren't going to get it. Fake news. Um, Kill me for saying that, but
That's pretty cool. Yeah, that's what inspired the creation of this film. Because at first I was wondering uh if The Day After was inspired this film, but I think they kind of were in production at least somewhat at the same time, probably because The Day After came out in November the year
and what is the
before,
day after?
and then this one came out in September. The Day After is the American equivalent of this movie, and it goes pretty hard for the American version. This goes like 3 times as hard to me,
Okay.
but they're very similar. Like it's the lead up to the explosion. The explosion happens about halfway in both of them. The first one's more, or the American one's very much like more focused on this farm family trying to survive in their shit in their cellar and stuff like that. And there is some carnage, you know. I really like the initial blast in The Day After, and it is pretty baller because it scared the shit out of a lot of Americans. But this one it just goes for this more insane, visceral, like it feels like a real documentary, and the other one's not documentary feeling at all. And
Okay.
it's very like you watch the other one, you're like, yeah, this is very American, and that one it is very anti-war, but some of it does feel a little, I don't know.
Jingoistic, patriotic.
Yeah, it's American in that way, I'll just say.
Yeah.
But I will say I would recommend it as further viewing for anyone that really likes this film because it did come first, and it's also an interesting watch, and the ending is also extremely fucked up too. Not as fucked up as this, but it
What's
has its point.
What's interesting to me is that the British are the one who made it more fucked up and crazy, and not the
Yeah,
Americans. If you had said, "Hey, which country would make a crazier, more action-packed atomic blast scene?" I would have
yeah,
picked American every time. But also, maybe you have to understand, the British were bombed a lot in World War II,
yeah,
and their cities were destroyed. And this was only 40 years later. I mean,
yeah,
the gap between World War II and this is almost the exact same gap as between this movie and now.
yeah. Weird, right?
Weird to think about. So you could have people, working on this production that served in World War II easily. That could happen. So somebody was 18 in World War II, and then they're a producer in some sort of production at BBC. Absolutely could happen.
Yeah,
So maybe that's why they had a grittier view of it all, because they weren't geographically isolated. Speculation.
yeah. And nuclear wars. Here's the thing: we get a lot of movies that are post-apocalyptic, And we get a lot of movies that are pre-apocalyptic and not a nuclear way. It's usually like a pandemic or like zombies or stuff like that. We don't get as many just straight up like, here is the actual day that the nukes went off and we're focusing straight on that.
Right. It's hard to pull off because you
Yeah.
have to pull off chaos and storytelling and then also make it interesting to watch where it's not how do we survive or how do we prevent the apocalypse? It's everything is fucked. And how you sell that to an audience that just
Yeah.
wants to
Which is
escape.
insane because in the 80s for TV, you would think that they would get to stuff more quickly, but it takes its time and it's not for 50-55 minutes before the bomb even goes off.
Yeah,
And
I'm sure it's almost a 2-act film. It feels
yeah,
like.
and it's not even like
you could break it down more, but
it's not even like it's giving you conventional arcs for its characters either. It's just kind of following them around almost aimlessly at points where you think that maybe because it's that TV, you know, like a more conventional film would be like, oh, her and her guy that he knocked her up, okay, they're gonna try and get back together, they're gonna find a way to survive together and raise their baby, blah blah blah. No, none of that. He's just fucking dead, I guess. And she
yeah,
has
that's what he dies, right?
yeah,
trying to
and
remember
she
what
has to
happened. Yeah, he
survive
dies.
the apocalypse alone. And then, okay, here are these two characters. Let's follow them. Oh, okay. So now their arc is we just watch them suffer until they fucking pretty much die.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's a lot of the arcs.
I know, it's
That's probably
awesome.
most of the arcs.
I mean,
That's
dude, that's so insanely subversive, especially for the time, to just be like, yep, this is our narrative. Watch people suffer. It's like misery porn almost. It's almost too much, but it's cool that it exists.
what's messed up is the buildup made me so anxious. I was almost relieved when the bomb fell, which is a weird thing to say, but I was almost like, oh, good. Now I can just watch people die of radiation sickness.
Dude, I got like a sick thrill when I heard the sirens going off and everyone's scrambling. I got like weirdly excited by that. I don't know. It's fucked.
It's because you're engaged and you want to see what happens next,
Yeah.
but it's also sickening. Also, you know it's not real, and you know the Cold War's
Also,
over, or is it?
as
But
a man who likes horror, to me, there's nothing freakier than this fucking scenario because it's so realistic
100% plausible.
and it's, you know, way more scary to me than like aliens, like War of the Worlds or, you know, like
Zombies, yeah.
zombies or something like that. It's just really
Right. I
frightening.
don't believe in zombies. I definitely believe nuclear weapons exist.
Yeah.
But you know, one thing I was thinking, and they've dealt with it in their own ways, namely through Godzilla. But imagine being Japanese and watching this, or being
Yeah.
an actual survivor. What is it called? Hibakusha is what they're called, the survivors, and watching this. Because there are people who have lived through this. I don't know
Yeah.
how many are still alive, but
Yeah.
there are thousands of people who witnessed this only with no warning and didn't even know what it was,
I
which
think
is
that
insane to think about on its own. This
only
is the
reason-
second great nuclear bomb movie we've covered in the past month. Go ahead.
I just feel like it does go a little too far in a couple places. Mainly I don't think they had to show those poor cats and dogs amongst the burned bodies and shit. I think that's when I started to feel like it was a little too like misery porn, like disgusting. But
Is that's what did it?
yeah,
I don't get you people who are more worried about dogs and cats in movies than humans.
that just made me feel like I was watching almost like an exploitation film. I was like, okay, that's too much.
I do think you could argue it's exploitative in the fact that it did have a political agenda to be anti-war, and
Which
so
is fine, but
they're going to be propagandistic in that
yeah,
in the same way that any politically motivated film is.
I will say a lot of those burnt corpses looked really good, like shocking.
They look just like the ones I've seen in real life.
It looked like I was watching a fucking snuff video or something. Watching that movie with your family in 1984. God.
And this, I think it aired without commercial breaks.
Yeah.
I think they just aired it just straight through.
'Cause that would be
Uh,
really weird to see a Kmart commercial right after that fucking bomb went off. Like,
Yeah, it would be weird. Hey, if you want to stock up on food for your shelter, come to Kmart.
yeah,
I want to talk again about post-apocalyptic fiction,
yeah,
and specifically post-nuclear fiction. One argument I've heard, and I can't entirely poke holes in it, as much as I love Mad Max and Fallout. Part of the reason there is an appeal to the post-nuclear stories is it is an escape fantasy. What if I could it's almost like a hyper libertarian escape fantasy. What if I could escape my grind and get back to nature and become a gun-toting badass or a homesteader or join a community that I really bond with? There is that sort of almost positive aspect portrayed of the apocalypse in a lot of apocalyptic fiction,
yeah,
and it's really interesting and I think necessary to watch a film that just says, no, deprogram that right now. It will be bad, and arguably, I don't know, how bad would it be? And it's hard to tell as we get
I
into
want to know how Britain got caught up in this particular scenario in this movie, why they were hit so hard. I don't really get that.
Why Britain? They had nukes by this point. I just looked it up. They did have nuclear weapons since 1950.
And they weren't really too involved in the conflict between Russia and America.
But was NATO signed by then? When was NATO signed?
Yeah, I guess so.
Because if NATO was signed, 1949.
Yeah, well.
So then they would have been dragged into it. So they had to nuke all of the Western powers.
Ouch.
Yeah. So that's why, and Sheffield's just enough of that area is enough. Yeah, here's one thing. So you and I have an Air Force base because we live in Little Rock. There's one not 20 miles outside town.
Yeah.
So we would be, if not in the blast zone, certainly in the fallout zone. And honestly, if I heard we were getting nuked, I would drive to that military base right away to ground zero just to get it over.
And that,
I've seen this movie.
That's the thing. Watching the movie, it's like, I'm not going through all this fucking suffering. I'm gonna kill myself.
Yeah.
Like, this is ridiculous.
There's in Britain they don't have guns. That's why the Second Amendment is so great. Because I guess they have hunting rifles and stuff, but obviously in Sheffield in 1984, they're not going to be packing all the time.
And then
there is one point you see a lady, she has like a broken lens of her glass, and they're in a shelter when it's first happening. And you see her like contemplate, and her husband, I presume, is like, no. But
yeah, and that one older lady, she's like begging to die, basically. Yeah,
wouldn't you?
Yeah, probably.
At that point, if you're 85 and the bombs drop, it's like, dude, just eat me. That's fine. I don't
And those guys, the people that are down in that basement, who are supposed to be in charge of the city.
That's one of the scariest parts.
They suffocated to death. They died anyway, so fuck it,
They die anyway. What's also... So imagine how our government responded to COVID, and then imagine how disorganized that was.
Yeah.
And then imagine a nuclear war.
Yeah.
There's no way. There's no way our governments could have any sort of real response.
No.
Especially with this being locked away in a file somewhere. People don't really know what they're supposed to be doing. People may not even know that they had these jobs. I found it really interesting. What do you think of whoever the local administrator who was given emergency powers leading up to the bombing? Do you know who I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Did his portrayal, did he seem almost chuffed to have these powers? Like almost kind of like, ooh, I get to exercise my powers now. Did he come off to you like that?
Maybe a little bit. It was interesting that he was kind of just shrugging off his wife when she was like taking it really seriously.
Yeah.
And he's kind of like, well, it's just I gotta keep everything in order. No big deal, whatever. And then he just kind of ditches his family. I'm like, damn.
That's what he's got to do. But also, you almost have to have you have to be able to play mental games with yourself in this kind of scenario of, oh, it's not really going to happen, or I'm going to turn out all right, or I can help mitigate the harm. You can't just be full of despair and function. But
Yeah.
I think it just requires such cognitive dissonance. I can't
But
even
also,
imagine.
yeah, cynicism is the way to go in something as extreme with this, especially if it does go off. Like if I was in a protected underground place, I'm sorry, I can't worry about anyone at the top. Nah, I can't do much. Like this
Yeah,
is the most extreme situation any human could be in. So I'm not gonna do shit. Sorry, buddy. You're up there on your own.
yeah, dying of leukemia or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, there's a yeah, this is a tense movie. This is a
Yeah,
heavy
and
movie.
I like when the bombs do go off, it's like completely quiet and it's like pure terror. And I like when the bomb goes off in Oppenheimer and it's quiet and Oppenheimer's reflecting in it. And
Yeah, that's how it would
so
be.
yeah.
See it before you hear it.
Yeah. But
Um,
I've had
it,
an actual I had a nightmare like 4 or 5 years ago about a nuclear bomb, and so it's always scared me extra since then. And it was like you see the flash, the white, and because I've seen so many movies, I knew to look away. Um, but the heat of the bomb actually woke me up, and I was like shook.
dang. Yeah, pretty sure that means you want to bang your mother.
Oh yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
that's what that dream means.
Yeah.
No, it's a terrible one of the most terrifying things when they talk about 1,500 calories or whatever for people who can work, 500
1,000.
calories for people who can't, 1,000 for people who can work, 500 for people who can't.
Yeah.
And then the question came up, is it even worth giving food to these people who can't work because they'll be dead in a couple weeks?
No, it's not.
Uh,
Like I
no,
said,
it's
you have to
not.
be
We
cynical.
should kill them. They're weak. Put them down. Eat
Yep.
them.
Sorry.
No cannibalism in
No,
this
don't
movie.
eat them. You'll get radiated.
I don't know how that works. You know what I'm reading right now? What I just read is that apparently the survivors of uh Hiroshima and stuff, their children weren't fine. They weren't mutants, apparently.
Yeah.
Which contradicts the end of this movie, but we'll get there. Um
Well, I don't know.
there is a and then there's an extreme escalation. What's interesting to me is I was reading up on like when is it safe to go out after a nuclear blast?
Yeah.
And everyone's like, wait at least an hour. I'm like, an hour? It's not raining. I'm not trying to keep my boots dry.
Well,
Is that
I think it depends on where the bomb is detonated.
yes, where the wind is going, what type of bomb, I'm sure.
Like, did they detonate it in the atmosphere,
Yes.
or did they let
Mhm.
it get ground level? That would be nuts.
Yeah.
So if it's
There's
in the atmosphere, it's gonna be less time, But yeah, that's kind of that they go into that a little bit more in the day after of them like kind of hold up in there. There's no time skip. And that's what's cool about this. Is like suddenly it's 4 months after it, and then it's a year, and it's very much like it's kind of like that show that I used to watch over a decade ago. What was it called? It was like Life After or Earth After Humans or
yeah,
something,
yeah, yeah.
whatever it was, which was like a simulation show, and it's kind of like this, except a little more straightforward. They had some interesting scenarios in that show.
They did have some interesting scenarios, and I read a book about that too. That was really interesting. Nature would heal.
Yeah.
It wouldn't take long for infrastructure to come crashing down. I hear some people argue that the Hoover Dam would still be working for a while, making electricity until it got all barnacled up and stuff.
I wonder how bad, like, because there could be different levels of nuclear war, obviously. And I don't know how realistic that is that like 13 years later, it's still like barely any infrastructure or anything. Like it's still like every man for himself. And I wonder if it really happened, wouldn't we be able to get some sort of town or centralized locations better than this? I don't know.
I guess you don't get shown a lot because the jump, that big jump, after the first year that jumps forward like 10 years or something,
Yeah.
that's the last 10 minutes of the movie, maybe.
Yeah.
So we don't see a lot. There do seem to be some sort of communities. I don't think it's every man for himself. They don't seem to have put up new settlements. They're just
But they're
living
still like scavenging around these desolate wasteland cities and stuff. You would think they might have found, maybe it's just this area they're in. I don't know, but you would think there's the 12, 13 years in, they could have some sort of better settlement than that, I think. Unless we really got nuked, like the whole world got nuked completely and there's no safe areas anywhere.
I think the whole world got nuked completely.
I don't know.
I think it was mutually assured destruction.
There's got to be somewhere that's not that radiated or something. I don't know, because it shows them their exodus from the cities, which is really cool to think about. It's like almost biblical, obviously the word exodus, but
Yeah.
I don't know. It's fascinating, and it's almost like I kind of wish we could have like a mini series that starts with the nuclear apocalypse and then follows it more in detail as they try to restructure and stuff.
Right. Because there's a question of like how much radiation would there be? The soil, they after that first harvest, and they're dealing with nuclear winter,
Yeah.
the soil being stripped of nutrients and not having fertilizer for that amount of people is a problem and will continue to be, but there's way to do that. Now the supply chain is obviously gone, factories are gone.
Yeah.
Toward the end of the movie, they do say they get steam power, which is interesting because I'm like, well, how did they mold all these metal parts together to put it into an engine to make it into a steam engine? So apparently we've had some sort of blacksmithing or manufacturing catch up. And maybe it's just distribution. Maybe there are cities that are doing better, but or that have more of a self-sufficient economy, but they don't have enough to export anything.
Yeah.
They're still subsistence. So everybody's having to grow their own food. And again, the population would keep declining from disease because there would be no medicine, no antibiotics being made, not to mention starvation and everything else. So,
Yeah.
I don't know. Who knows? And also maybe it's the movie being edgy. They didn't want an uplifting ending, obviously.
Yeah. Well, obviously. And also, from what I can tell, this is the first movie to portray a nuclear winter, which I don't know how realistic that concept is, if that's how it would fully affect the environment or not.
I mean, nuclear winter is it's a real thing that is proposed that would happen. I don't know exactly how it works.
It's fucking bleak, I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
Having to deal with the fallout, but also enduring those insane cold temperatures.
Yeah.
And it shows it even shows the bodies of like children and old people in the snow, and just to stack on top of it. It flexes in this movie. And like there's that imagery of her. Well, obviously she's still pregnant at the time, and she just happens upon that lady who's just holding her burnt corpse of a baby I guess in some insane denial. That's right there. All you'd have to do is show that to people, show a picture of that and put it in like a textbook and say, this is what could happen with nuclear fallout. Now, I think that imagery alone would have the same effect on people, especially like kids or something. They'd be like, what the fuck?
Yeah, that'd do it. It does bring, I think having children is kind of a sort of denial. Because you have to deny, if you're in the 80s, you have to deny that your kids are being born into a world where nuclear threats exist. And now I think our generation is dealing with it with climate change. People aren't wanting to have kids because they're worried about how that's going to affect, well, the climate, but also the economy and everything else. I'm not saying, and I'll make climate change comparisons, not because I think climate change is going to be as intense as this. It might be in some parts of the world, actually, in the third world. But they're already, scavenging for food and stuff, arguably. So, I'm saying like third world poverty is going to be hit.
Yeah, I know.
And
we can't even get that in order. Yeah.
No. And so it does make me think about that, and it's like how, what kind of world am I bringing my child into is a question that's unfortunately being asked more and more. But I guess it's good to ask that. We'll see. These next 10 years are going to be real interesting to watch, and the complete lack of collaboration, and AI is going to be making deep fakes of the president, so nobody will trust anything. And then
they've been trying to get shit prepared for global warming or climate change for the last 20-25 years, and no one's doing shit about it.
Yeah. No, we're in full damage control.
And we're the generation that grew up, like, they showed us that Al Gore documentary in middle school. So, which I'm surprised my Christian ass teacher showed it to us, because she would always be like, she would teach us the lesson in my science class in 6th grade, but then she would say, well, as a Christian, I have to disagree with this, but I'm told to teach it, so here you go. And I'm like, Jesus.
About what? Photosynthesis?
No, I think evolution at one point, and like a couple things here and there, and
right.
And I don't know, that really affected me as a kid. I was like, what? Like, anyway, but more so, like, sure, Gen Xers and Boomers, they lived through the threat of nuclear fallout a little bit more than us for a while. Cold War threat, but also, if you were a kid in the 50s, you had the duck and cover initiative at school, which was pointless but funny in hindsight. But we grew up with 9/11 and school shootings and all this good stuff, global warming. And so
there's always something. The difference is that the totality of nuclear war is so unlike anything else that you just said.
I know, but it's
global warming, although that's global in scale. But
like
we've all had our things to be afraid of growing up.
We've had all these things to be afraid of, but then we had the pandemic, and we've been through several recessions, and just all these things keep stacking. And it's causing, I've noticed, a lot of millennials and Gen Z to just go completely numb to each new iteration of world events that come out. And it's very frightening, and you can't really blame them. But I feel like nuclear war is always going to be something that will get the attention of anybody, and the dealing with that, and will I think once we get the older folks out of these positions, these 80-year-old, 70-year-old people,
98 Henry Kissinger.
Yeah, I feel like our generation would be more equipped to deal with these kinds of scenarios. I don't know. I think there should be some sort of contemporary version of this in some sort of way to kind of
the day after tomorrow.
Something good.
Oh, okay.
Something that is powerful.
Al Gore made an Inconvenient sequel.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just feel like,
just if we want to be depressed.
That's the thing, is like Roland Emmerich has turned disaster porn into a fun time at the movies, but only recently has that really gone away. No one's interested in that kind of stuff. I think because they're so burnt out on all the real stuff happening in real life. Because Moonfall was a complete flop. Independence Day 2 was a complete flop.
Those are also shitty movies, though.
2012, I remember people wanted to see because it was actually came out in the year 2012, but no one talked about it ever again.
Yeah, I remember people for a week mentioned it at high school, but I remember one time this redneck and I got in an argument because I don't even remember how it went. I just remember I was talking about 2001, and he was trying to make fun of me for being a nerd. And I was like, "Have you seen 2012?" And I thought he said 2010, the year we made Contact, the sequel. And I was like, "Oh no, I heard that. I heard that's pretty bad." I was like, "Oh, you said 2012 because you're a plebe, you redneck."
2010 is like a weird movie. I've tried to give it 2 chances. I've watched it twice. I watched it the first time and I was a teenager, and then I was like, years later, I was like, I couldn't remember a thing from it. So I was like, I'll give this another chance. Everyone's telling me it's underrated. And then I watched it again, and now to this day, I still can't remember anything about it. So that pretty much tells you what you need to know. I guess, but what I was getting at was, we had an Inconvenient Truth, which was pretty effective at the time for at least our generation. We need something to hit harder. We need something harder than an Inconvenient Truth, something harder than this.
But if people, here's the thing, people are so damn numb.
I know that's the problem.
Because of
get to them.
There's too much news. A real school shooting doesn't bother them.
I know.
You almost have to make a movie or something emotionally manipulative because we've become so numb to truth. And also, it's one of those things, the scale of a nuclear war, global warming. I can understand the scale of the school shooting, but of a nuclear war or something that global,
there is that disconnect for sure.
I can't wrap my head around it.
Yeah, exactly. That's
why this is focused just on one city and some people in a city, and Oppenheimer's just one guy. Because if you tried to show what was happening in every country, it'd be a 28-hour movie.
This is the hottest year in human recorded history.
Yeah.
And so it's not going to slow down anytime soon for climate change.
Yeah.
And so how do you get to this generation of numb individuals? I saw TikTok the other day that was a video that they took of themselves hiding in the back of a Spencer's because of an active shooter warning, and they turned it into a meme. And that's where we're at. The person who made the video turned it into a meme on TikTok, and everyone was like, wow, this is hilarious.
I really think I don't know. I worry a lot about kids today. They obviously lack resilience, which is an actual psychological term, and don't know how to actually process their emotions. And they know the vocabulary of psychology, but they don't have the emotional maturity to really use it. They just kind of throw words out there. And also they're not psychologists, so they're not necessarily trained to use the terms properly. They just throw stuff out there. So I don't know. I do worry about these kids who will just, and I understand using humor to take the edge off things. I do, obviously.
Sure.
And
I'm just saying that's where we're at.
That's where we're at. And I don't know where it goes. I think the first thing is admitting that it's not cool. I don't think that's funny or cool that somebody did that. And I feel like I'm the old man now. But if it was an actual warning, that's an insane thing. I remember I worked at the public library and we had to have a active shooter training day, which was worthless, of course. But it's just a weird thing to think about.
Yeah, it's demented.
It's demented.
I like that. In this movie, I like that. For some reason, 10 years later, all these new kids born post-apocalypse speak like this weird broken English gibberish. At first, I thought it was just really extreme British.
Yeah, me too.
I was like, wait a minute.
I have to adjust to this movie because I'm like, some of these accents are hard.
Yeah, but their broken English kind of reminds me. That's a fun little trope in sci-fi or post-apocalyptic movies. I especially like it in Clockwork Orange, the Droog kind of speech, which I heard was really annoying when you're reading it in the book, but it works in the movie.
It's thicker in the book and it has no real explanation.
Yeah.
A lot of people prefer the book. I say just watch the movie, honestly. And some people argue the ending and stuff, but I didn't make it through the book. I was halfway through and I was like, I know how this goes and I'm tired of reading this. Honestly.
I just that's fascinating to me. And just 10 years, how did it devolve that hard?
I think that was a bit much.
Yeah, I do too.
I don't think they would be that intellectually behind. I could see their reading and writing not being as good for
Oh,
sure.
easy.
But
When no one
they're
has time to really teach, when you have to harvest as much crops as you can with what little soil you can, and there's only limited windows, much more limited.
one of my favorite scenes in the movie was just really basic English language lessons on videotape that's barely
Yeah.
working,
Yeah.
showing to kids that look like they could be 14, way older than the intended audience.
Yeah. That was actually, yeah, that's one of my favorite scenes too.
Just because it's so simple, just like
It's so simple. It's also so sad. That's all they have. And they probably only have one or two tapes. They probably, and like that lady in the back was quoting it. So she's probably been showing it to people over and over and over again because that's all she has. That
right.
sucks.
None of them know how to really teach.
Yeah.
Because I've taught English, and that's about how it feels. That's about I've taught English as a second language. I'm like, well, at least some of my students can speak better than the kids in this movie. No, that is the thing. I'm still blown away. I almost can't believe that the Hiroshima survivors didn't have more birth defect problems. So maybe it wouldn't be that bad. Because do you want to go ahead and talk about the last 15 minutes of this
Sure.
movie?
Yeah. She
gives birth.
gives birth.
Hey, like Jesus. Or like
Yeah.
Mary, I guess.
Like Mary. Yeah. Jesus hasn't given birth.
Yeah, no, not well. He could. He can do anything.
Okay. Well, yeah.
But no, she gives birth, immediately starts bawling. Oh, after we see her bite her own umbilical cord. That's cool.
Which is pretty cool. Yeah.
Pretty cool. But she's bawling, and in my head, I'm like, she's bawling because she does not want this kid and is ashamed that
there was nothing to do. Nothing she could do, which also is a great contrast to the beginning where the parents are like, well, have you thought about abortions? And he's like, no, hell no. We both want it. And it's like, okay.
Well,
right.
Should have rethought that.
Why,
there was a point there where I thought they were going to eat the baby, and that was how that movie would end. Which I
it
would
still
have been down.
ends with a really baller fucking ending, I will say.
Well, before that, so then we jump forward 10 years or so,
Yes.
and Ruth, the main character, she has cataracts. She's aged, 30 years and 10 years.
Yeah.
And she ends up dying. She ends up dying in bed. And the way they play it up, it's almost too much. Her daughter almost doesn't understand what death is, or doesn't seem to, or seems to be numb to it. It's very confusing because she calls her mom Ruth, first of all.
Yeah.
And is like, wake up. And then just kind of takes some stuff, like a comb and stuff she had under the pillow, and then walks out, just because that's what you do when somebody dies. You loot them and then you walk away, I guess. There does seem to be, like, I know this is a different society and it's callous and they're mentally handicapped or whatever, but if somebody has a mental disability, that doesn't mean they don't grieve if their parent dies, but it's also just to show us this is the kind of world we're living in.
Yeah, for sure.
If you don't share bread, you get raped and impregnated, like Ruth's daughter does at the end of this movie,
which is fucking gnarly. And I don't know if it's a lack of empathy that her mom's dying. I don't think she has the connection to her like you and I would to our parents.
It's probably more communal living.
Yeah. It's more of a she watches people collapse every day from long-term effects from nuclear fallout. So I don't know. It is definitely weird. And she, for some reason, she can't speak regular English to her mom, even though her mom couldn't teach her basic stuff. I don't know.
It's an odd thing. That part of the movie seems real played up to me.
It is played up. It almost makes me wish there was like a part 2 that just focuses on the 10-year gap and like when it's a little more advanced and they're trying to get shit a little bit better back together. But like I said, it would make for an interesting mini series. But instead we get the really fucked up ending to really tie it all up. And like I said before, that's the most crazy thing. You think about 80s media at the time and how sanitized a lot of it is, and how
American media,
a lot. Well, yeah, American movies, but it's just tropes of films and how people expect narratives to go, especially in a TV movie. You think, well, they're gonna survive, they're gonna make it out of whatever, they're gonna endure. Basically, is what you would think going into something like this. And then, oh, her and her partner will get back together. People will escape. People will rebuild. It doesn't show any of that. Instead, it just goes deeper and deeper into darkness. And this 13-year-old girl is impregnated. And then we watch her give birth to this bloody, nuclear, disgusting baby. And she looks upon it in horror. And then it just cuts to credits, which is baller
it's
as
a police
fuck.
frame of her screaming at her mutant, likely stillborn baby.
Yeah.
Because we don't hear it cry. Which now, after reading that Hiroshima survivor thing, I don't know if it's true. I want it to be. I hope it had third eye. I hope it full on like a Leela from Futurama, just a one eye.
Yeah.
So she knows enough to know that babies shouldn't look that way. So that's nice, I guess. They have better sex ed in the post-apocalypse than they have in Arkansas today.
Jesus. Well, yeah.
Why is it called Threads? Let me ask you that.
I don't know. It might be some
Colloquialism.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know. I thought it could be like the threads of society that bind us together. Are
yeah, maybe so.
Something like that. Or the threads are the lines on the map of the nukes or something. I don't know. Even the buildup was interesting because it was based around, you hear it on the radio and stuff, Iran. The Soviets and the Americans had interest in Iran. The Americans backed a coup in Iran, which we've done before, basically, but that overthrew a pro-Soviet government, and the Soviets invade, and things escalate. It's really interesting. Like, it says at one point, the Soviets launch a nuclear-tipped missile, and then the America responds, and then it's just silence. It's like, I do wonder, like, I'm trying to think of what in the Cold War was the closest, like, of actual Soviet and American forces fighting, versus all these weird proxy wars that we fought, in like Vietnam and stuff.
Yeah.
What did you think of the narration? This is my last question.
I liked it because it made it feel like I said, like a documentary from a alternate timeline or something.
Right. There was argument in the production about this. I think it wasn't used very often.
Yeah.
So when it came out, it popped out and kind of took me out of the movie. Maybe that was intentional to call you attention to the fact that you're watching a movie, kind of Brechtian in that sense. I think it could have done fine with just the title cards or the text that it had without the narration.
That's fine, but also it was a different time period and it was a TV movie. So
people need things explained to them because they're plebes.
But for me, it added this weird extra layer that I liked. So whether they had that intention or not, it worked for me. Right. And I do like that initial buildup. And I like that scene. We're getting all of this info via radio and TV and stuff in the background. And there's one point where the guy, he's at the bar with his friend, and they ask him, because of they're kind of ignoring a lot of these characters, but at this point, the barkeep tries to change the channel, and they say, "No, we were watching that. Go back to it." So obviously, they do want to pay attention to it now. But even then, the friend of his says, what can you do? Whatever, and just keeps drinking. And I don't know. That was an interesting little.
I mean, that's kind of true, though.
I know, yeah. I don't know. I would be looking at the map, and I would be trying to pinpoint some random area out in the sticks that wouldn't be in the blast radius or in the fallout zone, and then just try and camp there, I guess, for a while. I would drive over there. I would have driven over there in advance. I'd be prepared, is what I'm saying. I wouldn't be on that fucking highway backed up and shit, and hell no.
No, I would try to steal food, and if they shot me, that's fine.
Which is interesting commentary, of course, that the world has been annihilated and we've still got capital punishment for trying to steal a can of fucking beans.
Hell yeah,
That's
bro.
insane, dude.
Hell yeah.
That's my
Indeed.
kind of cinema.
Yeah. What is this, Texas?
Yeah.
Threads.
Threads.
It's on YouTube.
It's on YouTube. Yep. Thankfully, yeah, they scanned it. You can buy it, physical copy, a 2K scan of it. So it's not just obscure VHS tape rips anymore, which is nice. Definitely check that out. Check out The Day After if you want further viewing, or if you want to watch The Day After first. If you haven't seen this, then watch this. They complement each other in a lot of ways, I think.
And watch The Day After Tomorrow.
No. I want to see Roland Emmerich do a grounded
Sound of Freedom.
Oh, dude. That ties in. That Sound of Freedom ties in because we were talking about like this age of numbness when it comes to like school shootings and stuff like that. But I was talking about, oh, well, we should have something better and stronger than what's it called? An Inconvenient Truth. But then you get shit like Sound of Freedom, which is obviously playing up over the top, making people like my mom, people her age, freak out and think that there is a human trafficker around every corner. And
think of the children.
That's when it goes too
That's
far.
political
You
playbook.
have to ride the line. You have to get you. First of all, it needs to be based in facts, not sensationalized Hollywood. So we have to find a good line there because I'm sick of this Sound of Freedom bullshit. I don't know why conservative moms, suburban moms are so freaked out and think there's human traffickers in their garbage bin.
Well, and I've heard, but I haven't seen the movie. I've thought of seeing it. I don't want to pay money to see the movie.
No.
Honestly, I don't want to support them because the problem isn't even. It's not the movie itself. It's everything surrounding the movie.
Right.
From what I've heard, the movie itself seems like okay, it's a political thriller or whatever. But the fact that you have Steve Bannon talking to the lead actor who's saying that politicians are harvesting children's blood in Ukraine for their health potions, basically. That's insane. And that's where it ties into all this misinformation and breakout communication. Right. And because people don't drink baby's blood to live longer, they drink it because it's delicious.
You heard it here first, folks. Thanks for tuning in. Next week we'll be back on a bit of a quite different film. Selena and Julie Go Boating, a 3-hour indie experimental film. So look forward to that. It's going to be the opposite of what we just discussed here. Got a couple other things coming out. Still working on the Asteroid City video. And then another thing down the line. Thanks for watching, everybody. I guess you could like and subscribe if you want. Maybe share the video.
No, if you don't like and subscribe, you're a bad person.
Yeah. Fucking filthy individual. All right. Don't be a Serbian. Be an Albanian like me. Good night, everybody.